Have you ever tried to hold a beach ball underwater? If so, you're probably able to do it for a few seconds, but then it just always seems to pop back up. Well, let's talk about how trying to push down or avoid anxiety can have the same effect. Hey, I'm Dr. Mike, and I think it's really helpful to think about anxiety as a beach ball. And you've got this beach ball and you're pushing it underwater, but it just seems like as you're pushing underwater, it just starts to rise up. And before you know it, it is jumping out of the water. Well, in similar ways, when we experience anxiety, our instinct is to push it down, get rid of it. It is so painful, it is so intense. And yet my guess is, your experience, is that these efforts to push down, hold down anxiety just result in the anxiety eventually popping back up. Well, what are some of the ways that we try to hold anxiety down, that we try to avoid anxiety? Let's talk about 5 ways that we typically use to try to avoid anxiety. So the first is avoidance of situations that evoke anxiety. Now, this can look like many different types of situations we avoid. Maybe you become very scared in public, so you start avoiding going out with groups of people, avoid being around people. Maybe there's a specific thing you're afraid of, so you avoid, for example, I know somebody who they're afraid of doctors, they're afraid of getting their blood drawn, so they don't get their blood drawn. Maybe for others, it's avoidance of a particular song that brings up painful memories, or a particular situation that brings up painful memories. So we avoid specific situations. Another way, a second way that people avoid is through substances. So this could be through alcohol, this could be through drugs. A person experiences anxiety and they immediately turn to the substance to try to push the anxiety away. A third way that some people use who have learned to avoid anxiety is through anger, right? They become stressed and overwhelmed and they lash out, because in that moment of becoming angry and lashing out, the anxiety starts to decrease. A fourth way that people avoid anxiety is through what I call internal avoidance. Now, this can be some different things. Maybe it's a person who really, like, you ruminate or you worry a lot. You're trying to plan things out. You're trying to plan for every possible situation that could occur. That's a way we can try to push away the uncertainty that's often common to anxiety. Maybe for others, the way this internal avoidance happens is through perfectionism, right? You really want to be perfect. Or maybe you work really hard to control everything that you can, because that's a way to push away anxiety. And then a fifth very common way that we try to avoid anxiety is through procrastination. There's a task, there's something that's due, and we keep pushing it off. Now notice, we only procrastinate those things that are uncomfortable or are unwanted to do, right? Rarely do we procrastinate something that is easy or desirable. We put off those things that create anxiety, because when they create anxiety and we put them off in the moment, it pushes the anxiety down. Now, the problem with procrastination, like these other 4 types of avoidance, is that eventually the anxiety returns. Now, here's the thing. Avoidance in and of itself is not bad. Those 5 ways that we avoid, none of those by themselves are problematic, right? There are situations that maybe you just avoid because they overwhelm you, right? Or maybe a person on occasion has a drink to decrease their anxiety a bit, right? There are moments where anger certainly has a purpose. Procrastination, sometimes that just works. Avoidance becomes unhelpful when it starts to interfere with our lives, when it starts to dominate everything we think and do. And so if you have found that anxiety is really taking a hold of you, or that avoidance seems to just interfere with you living out your values and achieving your goals, what do? Well, I'd be curious. I'd love for you to share some of the ideas. What are some of the ways that you found have been helpful? But I think one really helpful way is when we begin to recognize that we don't have to hold the anxiety underwater in order to live our lives. In other words, maybe the solution that I have to get rid of anxiety in order to be effective, maybe that's not a solution at all. There's this concept that the solution is part of the problem. Our mind comes up with this idea that anxiety is so uncomfortable, it's so intense, it's so overwhelming, the panic is so strong that I must first eliminate it in order to live my life. But again, when we work so hard to eliminate it, when we work so hard to control it, to push it down, it just comes up in a more intense manner. So what if we don't have to eliminate the anxiety? What if we don't have to work so hard to always avoid the anxiety? Now, this is paradoxical, counterintuitive, and maybe your mind is saying, that doesn't make any sense. That's okay. That makes sense that our mind would respond that way. I just have this question for you to reflect on this. Have you found that your efforts to avoid anxiety, have they really worked? Have they really solved the anxiety? And if not, what if there is an alternative? What if the alternative is that we don't have to continue to push this beach ball of anxiety under the water? What if we can learn to live our lives even while it's next to us, even while it's present? Now, does that mean anxiety just goes away? No. But it also doesn't mean that we have to like anxiety. We don't have to enjoy anxiety. That's not what it's about. It's about that we don't have to fight anymore with our experience. We don't have to fight anymore with ourselves. We can have these emotions. We can have the sensations with the emotions. We can bring them with as we engage in the things that matter most to us. And here's what's fascinating. As we begin to make the focus of our life on what we can actually control, the actions we take, living out our values, pursuing our goals, connecting with the people that matter most to us, we make life less about having to solve anxiety. Anxiety begins to have less of a role in our lives. So today, when anxiety shows up, no doubt you'll be tempted to grab a hold of it, push it down, to avoid it how you typically avoid it. But maybe, just one time, consider what it could be to allow it to be present, to lean in and take that first action of something that's really meaningful to you. It might not solve the anxiety, but it might give you a sense of freedom and vitality.